Ah, ¿dónde está mi teléfono? Míralo allá. Hace frío, con. Qué frío hace, ay María Santísima. Yo tengo frío. Ay, ay, ay. Non-fiction games. We're gonna listen to this. Oh. Left and hello, it is I, El Vencedor, and we're gonna continue reading about uh, communism. Tell me about other communists. Proletarians and communists. What are the role of communists? And what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. Number one, the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries. They point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. Number two, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interest of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand, practically, the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. Let's read this. Read this, guys. Read this. This part right here. Read it. Okay. What's mass? Read it. Read it. Read it. You must read, my friends. You must read to be educated, to be liberated. While you read, I'm going to stay right here, doing nothing. Enjoying the music and vibing. I'm just vibing to the music. Okay. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties. Formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. What's a universal? Read, guys, read. You need to be well read, to be well educated, to be liberated. Okay? Read, guys, read. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. So, how will property relations change under communism? All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. Now, this is a good word. Very important. Let's read what it means. I'm gonna give you guys a chance. A chance. If you're watching the rerun, I suggest, nay, I encourage you to pause the video and read this as carefully as you can. You need to read, my good friends. You need to read to be liberated. Only your education can bring your liberation. I beg of you to break your own chains, the chains of ignorance, the chains of comfort that dare to hold you down and allow the bourgeois to exploit you. Free yourselves, my friends. Free yourselves. Let's continue. In this sense, the theory of the communist may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. And remember, guys, private property means factories, not your toothbrush, okay? That's something a lot of anti-communists like to point out, to misrepresent so that you won't understand what it is that communism wants. We communists have been reproached with a desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of petty artisan, of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There's no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. This is true. Try looking at a small personal farm. See how well that goes. How many small farmers, to give an example, across the USA are seeing their lands seized by banks only to be demolished and turned into freeways, huh? The exploitation of the little guy, the proletariat, by the bourgeois continues to this day. We continue. Or do you mean the modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, the kind of property which exploits wage labor, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property, in its present form, is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal, but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not only personal, it is social power. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. So, how will wage labor change under communism? Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. Ooh. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, I'm going to have to read this. Living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. What's bourgeois society? Read this, guys. Read this. Don't just have me as background noise. You need to read. You need to be educated. You need to break your chains, my friends. Please, I am begging you. Okay, we continue. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of the state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling, and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying, and all the other brave words of our bourgeois about freedom in general, have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with the restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages. But have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. Well, what about my property? What's going to happen to my property? Like my PS4 and my Nintendo Switch 2 and my bed. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existent society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say, individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must, indeed, be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriations. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. Oh! According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have, in the same way, been urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as, to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. But don't wrangle us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property, the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Notions? You need to read. You need to read. Okay? Very good. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all. A will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. What is will? Read, guys. I need you to be able to read. Hey, I love this song. The selfish misconception that introduces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason, the social form springing from your present mode of production and form of property. Historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit is the case of feudal property. You are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna. I'm gonna. I'm gonna rest my throat a little bit, and we're gonna enjoy the international. Okay. Ah. Hmm. La, da, 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 da. Ah, nothing like. Okay, that's enough of that. That's enough of that. Save it again, just in case. What about my family? There's no music. Okay, there we go. Now we have music. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletariat and in public prostitution. Woo. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But, you say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society, by means of school and so on? The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more by the action of modern industry. All the family's ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists will introduce community of women, screams the bourgeois in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife as a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to exploit it in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of a bourgeois at the community of women which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Uh, is this sounding a little recent to you? With a certain little island and a certain little man whose last name starts with E? Hmm? Are you reminded of something? Bourgeois marriage is, in reality, a system of wives in common. And thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e., of prostitution, both public and private. Oh, well, ladies and gentlemen, I need to apologize. Once more, my vocal cords have taken their toll, and this is a very gabby type of visual novel. But I want to sort of expand on something that we read right now on the Communist Manifesto, and that is the notion of women. Right now, it's one of the biggest topics in the culture struggle, the culture war, as some may call it, between feminism and, well, whatever is opposing feminism. I suppose you could say it. You could call it, I mean. But the feminism that is presented by these cultural warriors, I would dare call it a bourgeois form of feminism. A feminism that, for some reason, wants to place women on power instead of abolishing power. We see it in places like Hollywood. You know, we have that girl boss trope that's very popular these days. Well, popular entre comillas, between quotation marks, because people don't really like girl bosses. They just like the virtue of liking girl bosses, of extolling girl bosses. But we gotta always remember that entertainment, as we see it, the mass produced entertainment, that's bourgeois garbage made possible by the sacrifices of the workers, the proletarians. Proletarians like actresses, and of course, script writers and the like. The script writers have to do what the bourgeois, the executive producers, tell them to do. And so we have girl boss stupidity, girl boss baloney on the big screen and on the little screens. And all this does is distract us from the fact that we still have big wigs in comfortable floor offices putting their hands on people who don't deserve hands on them. You know what I mean. The classic image of the boss getting handsy with his beautiful secretary. It might be cliche to say this, but really, it's bad that this happens. That's a very childlike way to say it. But if I'm being honest, we need to we need to be clear on our values, and one of our values has to be that we value the people's right to their body, to their own body, the right to not be touched without consent. And this isn't some baloney uh, from one of those videos where you see that some upscale hipster, I mean, asking permission to touch a person when they're being a barber. No, 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 that's not what I mean. I mean the real stuff. Stuff like people putting their hands on employees. Because it's not just men who do it, although it is men who do a good chunk of it, being that most positions of power are held by men. But the problem isn't men or women. The problem is the imbalance of power and how this imbalance leads many people to cross lines, for lack of a better word. And this happens a lot. This happens a lot. And that's why we gotta, be clear when we say this is not okay. And when it's depicted in comedies and such, we need to point out, hey, that's not okay either. If I might be allowed to do another parenthesis in regards to feminism, I'm not against feminism, not in the least. I'm all about the women's equality, women's liberation, that sort of yada yada yada. But I'm not wild about the bougie form of feminism. Excuse me. That Anita Sarkeesian type of feminism. For example, in video games, you might not remember Anita Sarkeesian. She was this, or I should say, is. Not sure if she's still active. I don't really care anyway. But she was most famous during the mid 2010s as the producer of Tropes versus Women in Games, where she spent around half an hour tops, talking about women in video games, fictional female characters in video games, and for a lot of people, they found it interesting, you know, learning about damsels in distress and the male gaze and so on and so forth. But I never took that seriously. And the reason why I didn't take that seriously is because at the end of the day, I lived in a completely different reality than her. I lived in a country where women, they get killed by jealous ex boyfriends or husbands or current boyfriends for no greater reason than because they pissed them off or because they ended their relationships or because they got pregnant. You know, it happens a lot. It happens so much that honestly, I don't even register it anymore. I just go, well, another one. That's too bad. And then I go continuing on eating my breakfast or playing my video games or whatever. And, that's my bad. That's my bad. And I shouldn't be so apathetic towards this. Well, no one should be apathetic to this situation. But my point is, I was living that reality. I couldn't pick up a newspaper without reading about another woman who got killed. And here is this internet lady talking to me about damsels in distress in video games. And I'm like, lady, you know, real people have real problems. These are pixels, sprites, and you're talking a whole lot of caca. And she had a whole lot of game journalists backing her up. And those who spoke out against her, well, we were shushed, we were humiliated, shamed. Our voices were not heard, except by, well, people who should not have been given any attention. The people who paid attention to our dissatisfaction with Anita Sarkeesian were the right wingers, the extreme right wingers, who hated feminism, who hated feminists. These were reactionaries. If you have been paying attention to the uh, streams that I've been doing on the Communist Manifesto, you will remember what a reactionary is. Well, they were reactionaries. The people who listened to us, and Gamergate as a whole became a reactionary movement because we started opposing feminism in gaming. We rose as a reactionary movement because we were reacting to a bourgeois attempt at controlling video games, which was disguised as women's liberation. But no one talked to us about women's liberation in gaming. We were dictated. We were what's the word? What's the word I'm looking for? Dictated, sermoned. We were sermoned, but we weren't talked to. We didn't have anyone who treated us with respect. And so we turned our attention towards those who gave us some superficial respect, gave us some superficial appreciation. And that's how a lot of proletariats fall for bourgeoisie and for fascism. This is the biggest way that fascism grows, actually. Fascism finds something that the proletarians are upset about, and they turn their insatisfaction away from the bourgeois and towards something else, someone else. In this case, on Gamergate, we were lured away. Our insatisfaction was lured away from the video game industry, which was controlled by a whole lot of bourgeois interests, and our insatisfaction was lowered towards people who, in the end, didn't really matter. We were angry at who? Independent game developers. We directed our anger at journalists instead of the journalist industry. We directed our anger at the petit bourgeois, and instead of focusing on our anger at what could have brought change, we focused our anger at fellow proletarians. And what did that get us? Well, a whole lot of teenagers of that generation fell into that rabbit hole of alt-right movements, and they now goose step to Trump, goose step to ICE, goose step to Le Pen, and all that garbage. Because when the time came to it, we when we needed someone to talk to us, no one did. No one did. And the loudest voices, well, they played us all like fiddles. We were all played like a fiddle. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this series of readings of the Communist Manifesto, because I fell for that rabbit hole. Granted, I got out while the getting was good, but I was still there. I was still there. I don't regret I don't regret what I stood for, but I do regret who I stood with. And in all ways I regret who I stood against. I really wish I could go back in time and educate myself better. But that's impossible. That's not something I can do. All I can do is help others right here and right now. That's why I'm telling you guys, don't believe the bullshit you're being fed. There are people who will tell you to turn your anger at, say, China, or turn your anger at the Democrats, the Republicans, the common everyday folk. No, no, don't turn your anger at your fellow proletarian. Turn your anger at the puppet master, at the bourgeois. Look upwards, see the strings, grab some scissors, and cut them. And don't forget that you have the power to break your chains. All you need is an education for your liberation. Well, this is El Vencedor saying thank you all for watching. Don't forget to give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Good night.